So welcome everyone. For those of you that don't know me, which I don't think anybody so far I've seen on the screen would be in that position. My name is Bev Ogue. I am the program coordinator for duty of care and incorporated ministries at the National Office of the United Church. And the camping standards has been one of my pieces of my portfolio for the 20 years I've been with the church. So I appreciate you taking your time on a Saturday afternoon. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the country, but it's been pouring rain here since sometime last night. So it's a great day to be indoors and not trying to be out in the gardens. So we're going to go through the new camping standards, and essentially what we want to do is sort of introduce it. If you have questions, you can either drop them in the chat, and Joe's going to keep track of those and we can deal with them at the end, or write them down. Or the other thing is just wait until the end of the session. And I would ask that you just hold your questions until the end, and we'll do them all at once. So we'll get started. So how did we get here? Like, how did we reach this stage? The first accreditation visits were completed back in 2004, and we visited 78 camps in that 1 year. The actual standards were introduced in 2002, and there have been revisions in 2007, 2010, and 2014. All the revisions were in response to what we were finding, what camps were saying, what was changing in legislation. We were trying to keep them current and meet the needs of both the camps and the church as a whole. With rising costs for travel, and particularly travel across the country, we needed to start looking at measures that would be saving us some funds, becoming more economical. And so with the technology advancing the way it had, we decided we would try virtual visits. So in 2018, 2019, we did virtual visits to 2/3 of the camps. And then we had COVID hit us in 2019. In 2020, and no visits were scheduled between 2020 and 2022. There's no point trying to do a visit when we're not doing camp. All the camps had their own stressors that they had to be dealing with, and so we postponed them. However, it was also an opportunity for us to step back and take a look at how successful things were, what we needed to be doing. And in 2021, we established the Camping Standards Working Group. In 2022, the revised standards as developed by the working group were approved by the General Council Executive. And we're using this year, 2023, as a transition year to help you transition from what we were doing before to what we're going to be doing, and do a self-evaluation of yourselves. Not something we're going to ask for, but to help you identify what do we have in place, what don't we have, where do we have to find it. And in 2024, we're going to resume on-site visits that will be led by a regional council team. So we're going to change things a little. It'll be more local, that rather than 2 or 3 accreditors that go across the country. So who made up this Camping Standards Working Group? We had from the camps, we had Joe Richards from the Pierce Williams Christian Center, Vicki Nelson from Lumsden Beach Camp in Saskatchewan, Christy Chisholm, who was a camp accreditor. All the years we've done visits, Christy has been an accreditor for all but 1 year of that time. And she's also a former Camp Kidston staff and board member. She was also a camper at Camp Kidston. So she's got a long history with camps. From the Regional Council and General Council, we had Jeffrey Dale from the Shining Waters Regional Council, Cheryl Ann Stadelbar-Sampa from Antler River Watershed, Western Ontario Waterways, and Horseshoe Falls, and myself. So why did we do this now? One of the reasons was there was a great feeling of disconnect with the wider United Church after the restructuring. With the loss of presbyteries, the camps were feeling that they didn't have a voice at any court of the church, that there was, and with the reorganization, the regional councils were focusing on getting all of their congregations up and running within the new structure. We needed a cost-effective program which met the needs of the camps and the needs of the church. And there had been an ongoing sense that there was a feeling of duplication between what the provincial camping associations programs did and what the United Church program did. This had been something that had been said from the initial 2004 visits, and over time, having done as many as we did, we worked towards a sense of being able to rely on the provincial camping associations for many of the things that we were asking the same questions. So the objectives in the review were that we ensured the original goals of the program are being met. And essentially that was that camps had in place the policies, the procedures, the documentation they needed in the event that an incident happened, doing things historically, meeting their requirements under legislation as a corporation. So we wanted to make sure that those things were being met. We wanted it to become a United Church focused program. So we were identifying the key United Church components that needed to be there and a mechanism to meet them. So like, what made you different from a camp that wasn't a United Church camp? It was just another camp. We wanted to utilize the Provincial Camping Association as a benchmark to avoid duplication. It takes a lot of time to prepare those visits, and we wanted to, and whether it was the provincial or whether it was ours, it took a lot of time. And it was like, why are we duplicating the efforts of one when they're the experts? They're better at this in certain areas than what we are. And we wanted to ensure connections were being maintained and nurtured between the camps and other levels of the church, as well as on an international basis. So the outcomes of the working group was the standards have been abbreviated. We're down to about a 10-page document now. And that includes not only the standard, but how to meet it. We really wanted to simplify it in that regard. The focus is on the requirements specific to the United Church. We're utilizing the Provincial Camping Association accreditation and award standing. And I want to emphasize that you can't just be a member of your Provincial Camping Association, you need to be accredited by the association. The Regional Council becomes responsible for the visits, including the completion of the site visit tool. And the General Council, so my area, becomes responsible for collecting all the required reporting. That annual report that's required every year. So the board has a major responsibility here. The board is the body responsible for the operation of the camps. To that end, the board, who is responsible to ensure that the Provincial Camping Association standards and the United Church standards are being met. They can delegate that work to meet the standards and the related legislation to committees of the board or to staff, but they can't delegate their responsibility. So at the end of the day, it's the board that's responsible to ensure that we're doing all of these things. So I mentioned the annual reporting. There's the camp stats, there's the compliance form, there's the insurance statement, including naming the United Church of Canada's additional insured, and this is in regards to your liability insurance. There's your annual report, and I will say that I read all the annual reports. There's your financial statements, which I admit I do not review your financial statements. And then there's the list of board of directors with contact information. And I'm just going to put a plug in here that, folks, your annual reporting is due within the next month for the 2022 season. So if you've had your AGMs, you've got all of this information already compiled, you just need to send it off to us. And I would encourage you to use your Church Hub accounts that we've got set up to send them in rather than sending it to us via email. So the standards and criteria cover 7 different sections. The Provincial Camping Association, your mission statement, theological values, which is the key United Church component, the governance and accountability, which is the role of the board, record keeping and record retention, leadership training and staff manual, your health and safety, and your leadership standards for offsite activities and adventure camping. Having reduced the number of standards, all of them are now mandatory. Where before we had a division between mandatory and desirable, All standards are mandatory, and the focus is on elements that are unique to United Church requirements. 3 components may be used to evaluate if a standard has been met. So physical documentation, you've got policies, you've got records showing you've done inspections, you've got your insurance policy, you have your financial statements, whatever. And as I've said, we've given examples within the standards as how you might meet them. The second component is visitor observation during the site visit. And this is a real important part where you get to show off what you're doing. And there's a lot of things that when you do that site visit, the team sees what's going on. They can say, oh, yeah, they've got that in place. They've got this in place. And the third component is discussion. So part of the visit needs to be a sit down with the board and staff as appropriate and discuss what you're seeing. And there might be subsequent discussion after the visit if something was identified and it's like, oh, so-and-so's not here today, but they can answer that question. We'll get back to you. You have the standards handbook, which is identifying the actual standard and an example of how it might be met. So the Provincial Camping Association, as I mentioned, every camp needs to be an accredited member of the Provincial Camping Association. Where a camping association does not exist or the camp isn't eligible for membership, then we will develop additional standards to be used to evaluate programming and legislation pieces typically addressed by the Provincial Camping Association. And we are aware of, we originally only had 5 camps that we fell into this category, but we found out this year that the New Brunswick Camping Association isn't an active association in regards to accreditation. So we'll be working with those camps to determine what they will need to complete in addition to the United Church standards. And what we're going to be looking for is confirmation of the most recent decision from your Provincial Camping Association. We'd ask that you send that in this year so that we're not tracking it down. If you happen to be in the first group of camps getting visited next year, we're not, hounding you for that just before you're getting the visit. But everybody could send it in, and then we have a base mark where we're starting as we move forward. So the mission statement and theological values. How do we demonstrate that we meet the standard? So a copy of your mission statement, point to the link on a website, your board minutes, because the mission statement should be reviewed on a fairly regular basis, agenda of training and orientation events, inviting your visitation team to see your program being delivered. I mentioned that Christy has done a number of visits over the years, and that was the challenge she had when we went to virtual visits, is really being able to evaluate that the Christian education program was being, criteria is being met. Being able to see how you do it is such a gift to the visitation team. And it shows how the various ways that we can share our Christian education to the young people that come to the camps. And then, is there an on-site presence? So you might have a chaplain, you might have a Christian education program person. It may be through some other mechanism that that's not their only function. But is there someone on-site, if people, staff, youth need to talk to, is there someone available to them for that purpose? Governance and accountability. So how do you demonstrate that you're meeting these standards? Well, first you have an organizational structure chart. How does the board relate to the staff? Full-time, seasonal, how are decisions made? Can you show that your annual reporting requirements have been submitted? And that's part of what my role will be, is to provide the regional council if there's anything outstanding before the visit happens. Do you have manuals and documentation available as related to the policies, your inspections, your test results, any special licenses you need to operate, including the special programs like ropes courses, certificates showing that they have their lifeguard qualifications, or a training certificate if it's a special program. Having all of these things available at the time of the visit is really beneficial. And they can be, if you've got them on a laptop that you can show them, that's great. If you've got them as hard copies, that's even better. Record keeping and record retention. I can't emphasize enough how important this is. There's legislation that you have to meet, but also historically, if something happens, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've got the records to show that you had insurance, for example, or if questions come up, that you've got financial records that show that everything was done properly. One of the first things you should have is a retention policy schedule and be able to demonstrate how that's being met. If you're keeping the records on site, where are they located, and how are they secured? This is particularly important for personnel records or medical records. Only those that need to see should be able to access those records. So you need to be able to answer the questions. Who has access? What is your backup process? And what is the process when transitioning between board members? So when the longtime dedicated treasurer retires and moves on, how do we make sure that everything gets transferred to them? And I've had the experience in this past year that about 5 long-term contacts that I've had for 20 years have finally retired. And I say that from the perspective of they're moving on, but I know that their camps are still a passion for them. But 20 years of having the same person doing work means a big change for people. The other thing that you need to keep in mind here is, in some cases, records aren't kept on site off season. So again, where are they kept? How are they secured? And is it in somebody's basement, or is it in a local congregation? And what, again, is the plan should the person move on, if it's in somebody's basement? How are you going to get the records back? Because it's important to have those. Leadership training and staff manual. You want to be able to demonstrate that people had training. So do you have sign-in sheets showing attendance for in-person events? Do you have a mechanism for tracking for online training? Do you have copies of the agendas and the presentations that were given during the training to show what was covered? And do you have a copy of the staff manual available either as a hard copy or electronically, not only for the visitation team, but for the staff through the course of the summer? Health and safety. How do you demonstrate you're meeting this standard? Documentation in your board or committee minutes that policies have been reviewed and revised. These include like your medical, your camp nurse policies, how you do health and safety inspections, what's the mechanism for reporting something when it's found to be needing repairs. And then discussion of how the medical needs of campers and staff are being addressed. We have many of the young people that come may have needs for allergies, most common thing, but there's other health issues that come up. How do you prepare for those kids coming onto the site and being there for the week or for the summer if it happens to be staff? Leadership standards for offsite activities and adventure camping. So first off, adventure camping is any activities in or through remote isolated areas and away from communities or established camps. This could be the back 58, you've got a 50-acre piece of property and you're in the furthest corner from the main camp. You're isolated. You're going to do your own cooking. You're going to do your own sanitation requirements. That would be described as adventure camping, even when you haven't left the property. Other examples would be canoe trips or trips where you go to an isolated spot that you're using. And offsite is any property not owned by the camp. So not everyone will have this requirement if you don't do any of this. But if you do, you want to see the policy and a program description to show us that you've met that standard. So what does the accreditation process look like now? The regional council will be responsible for coordinating the actual visits and the time, and this needs to be a mutually agreed time with the camp while it's in season. Visits will continue to be on a 3-year schedule unless there is some need that's identified during a visit that it needs to occur before then. And the plan at this point, but the final decision is with the regional councils, is all of those camps that should have been visited in 2020 would be the first on the list to get the visits next year, because it's been a long time since we've seen them. Annual reporting status will be confirmed by the duty of care program coordinator, which is myself, and your reporting must be up to date to meet the standard. Camps are encouraged to use the site visit tool as a self-evaluation prior to the visit. And this is a tool that will be posted on the website so that you can start filling that in now and sort of saying, oh, well, this is where we'd find that, or here's who we need to talk to about to make sure we've got it. It really is for you to be prepared for the visit. I don't want to see it. The regional council doesn't need to see it before the visit. And it, you know, as I said, you can start working on it now to get a sense of who do we need to talk to make sure we have that available. So this is essentially what the self-assessment tool will look like. It's going to have the standard, whether or not it's being met, and a place where you can write in notes as to how, like, you know, have submitted this, the 2020 accreditation site visits from the Provincial Camping Association. So the regional council team will arrive on site as scheduled to conduct the visit. Board and staff representatives with knowledge of the camp and the accreditation standard requirements will participate in the on-site visit. Post-visit, that team will prepare and submit a summary report to the regional council and the general council office. Based on the summary report and any received documentation, the duty of care program coordinator will determine if all the requirements have been met in the status decision. Camps will receive a letter indicating the decision be their status. If all the requirements haven't been met, camps will be given the opportunity to address outstanding items where identified before the final decision is determined. There will be a deadline for that submission. Failure to meet all the standards will result in further action being required by the regional council in a progressive manner. So we're here to help you meet the standard. If you're missing a policy, if you don't know how to meet something, you're having a challenge with whatever, that's where the regional council and my office can provide some support. So, questions?
Nobody put questions into the chat, but some things that have come up in the previous meeting. That self-assessment tool isn't quite ready yet. It will be posted shortly, and it will be posted. What is the name of that page, Bev, that they would search for?
When you go on the United Church website, go to the top tab is leadership, and then you want duty of care, I think it is. We will make sure a link gets
sent out, because we are recording this this presentation, and then we'll send that out. So if you are not registered for emails from the Outdoor Ministries Institute, we encourage you to sign up for that, because that is where most of the information that's coming from camps to other camps will come from. And you can go to wearecamp.ca to sign up for that newsletter. But we will send another link out. So Canyon Church Camp is just starting to rebuild after the 27 wildfire. Perseverance, we can do this. We hope to have small camps in 24 or 25. Can we expect a visitation? I'm not sure. I haven't seen the visitation schedule. Bev, do you?
And that's again, I think, a conversation with the regional council in regards to the timing. If you're not running camp, I don't know, Kathy, if you were the one that asked the question, or someone else from Canyon, if you're not running camp, there's no reason, you know, I won't say there's no reason for them to come out, but the visit will not be as effective as when you're actually running camp. So you guys have had a long struggle here before they've even given you the permits to go back in and start building. So we recognize that, and I'm sure the regional council will take that into consideration when you're scheduling the visits, and we'll make sure that that's part of what we share with them, is that you haven't been running camp for a while.
Bar Harbor was asking about where there's not an association. So what Bev had said earlier was that New Brunswick is not in the accreditation business. So the New Brunswick Association, I don't think, is Bar Harbor in, where's Bar Harbor? I should know this, but I don't.
We're in Alberta. It's
Yeah.
okay. I was just being nosy. I know I have a camping.
Alberta, well, not all of our provinces do.
Yukon doesn't have an association, so that's one that we're going to have to work with. Newfoundland doesn't have an association, so we have to figure that one out. And we have one camp that is in Quebec that only operates for a week, and to be accredited in Quebec, you have to operate for 2 weeks. So we were aware of the Yukon, the Quebec camp, and the 3 Newfoundland camps when we were developing the standards. And we were hoping that we were going to be able to piggyback onto one of the other associations in the maritime area, but that isn't possible. So we will figure it out, and those camps will be advised specifically as to how we would be looking to meet the outstanding pieces.
When do you expect the self-assessment tool to be ready for use is a question.
Within the next couple of weeks. We've been busy with a lot of things, so I have to get to the editor, and then it'll get posted on the website.
And then Isabel from Kidston asked, the wording you mentioned is that 3 components may be used to evaluate compliance with standards. Whose decision will it be to which of these are required? I don't know what slide that is.
So Isabel, essentially, we say there's 3 different components that may make it up. All 3 might be used in part of it. It might be only documentation is required. The standards are what we wanted to emphasize is it's not just relying on a piece of paper. And things like the programs that are being offered, the condition of the site, those kind of things are going to be more encompassing with all 3 elements. And so I would say that it's not a case of which ones are going to be used. They'll all be used in some manner or another as part of the process.
If I could just sort of a follow up to that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, again, I'm just, I guess, trying to get a sense of what that envisioned relationship is in terms of, or process in terms of the decision making. And so who, I guess I'm a checklist kind of gal. and I think that, you know, the one way to manage the anxiety leading up to accreditation is to have a good checklist and be able to kind of got all my ducks lined up. And I'm just wondering who's going to decide what is enough. Like if we have documentation, but we can't demonstrate it on the day that the site visit happens, or if we can demonstrate it on the site visit, but we haven't got the documentation ready. Like, I just wonder, what is the nature of that decision-making process? How is it envisioned at this point?
Okay, so that's a good example of what we were talking about. So let's say that you can't run the ropes course, just using an example of something that could not be offered maybe the day of because it's raining and it's not safe. That doesn't mean, then you have a discussion in addition, so you can't observe, but you've got your documentation showing you've got everything's been, inspected and whatever, and you have a discussion as to what is the process when the kids are there, as opposed to being able to actually see it and that what is being said is going to be done is actually happening. So that was the example of you can't demonstrate it, but on the day of. And what was the other part of the question, Isabel?
Well, again, I'm just kind of trying to decide ultimately.
No, but you gave one example where you couldn't demonstrate, and then you gave another.
Well, just that we don't have the documentation, but we demonstrate it when it's there. Like,
Okay.
it's just who's deciding the combination of things? Is that
Okay,
ultimately
so
the
if
regions that are
documentation
deciding
is
that?
required, that would be where we would say, like when I said, follow-up might be required. You know, the report that will come back, so the site visit team does a report, that will come to me. If I have questions or I've got concerns that something hasn't been met, I would follow up with the site visit team and say, well, what was this, or what was, the same as I would have with the accreditors in the past. And then if it's a case of you're missing a particular policy, it's like, okay, Isabel, we note in here, we've got everything except you didn't have a policy around this. What's your plan to get that in place? How will you implement it? And that would be where we say you have time to respond to any outstanding items, any deficiencies. And we would have a timeline where we would say, okay, by December the 1st, you're going to have this in place to give you time after the season. Like, we're not expecting that it's going to immediately get through all the board requirements to get it approved, but we set a deadline as to when it would happen. You indicated that you're a checklist person. I relate to you totally, and that's where the self-evaluation tool will become very useful for you, because you can check, write in, here's the documentation we need, here's the manuals we need to have in place, have available at the time.
My interpretation of that as well, Isabel, and interpretation is a bad word to use when you're doing standards, but as someone who's been a standards visitor and a visitee for the Ontario Camping Association, if I read in your policies that you're non-smoking, and then I arrive on site and I see 3 of your staff smoking by the dumpster, those two things are not congruent with each other. And so it's either that you haven't demonstrated, you may have demonstrated the policy in writing, but what actually goes on might be something different. This is the big challenge my board is having, that our bylaws often say things as they're supposed to be done, but we as boards might not, you as boards and we as camp people might not be doing the exact same thing. So it should be both, that those two things work together. And that is not a judgment call. That is saying, you say you're not smoking and I see smoking, so which is it? And then you just correct one of the two. Another question came up regarding under the health and safety standard, does this take into account training staff on duty to report as it relates to reporting to child abuse by staff or suspected child abuse, e.g. a child mentions something that might infer that a child is being neglected when they're at home?
That would be something that is generally now being covered under the Provincial Camping Association standards. When we worked on these, Joe was part of the committee, so he can attest to this. I took all of the standards manuals that were current at the time. I had this huge spreadsheet that sort of lined everything up to see what was being covered. And that is because it is a government requirement, like it's a law that you have to report. It's in all the provincial camping associations. So again, we're not trying not to duplicate things. It might be a question that the site visit team asks about how do you deal with these kind of issues, just to understand how your camp is addressing some of those things. But it's not, the health and safety standards are pretty broad. Like they're limited to things that we want to see over and above with the provincial camping. So it's a pretty small section actually now.
And duty to report falls under provincial standards, but also just falls under you being a camp, right? So under your health unit standards as well. These are great questions, people. Are there any other questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and actually talk. That is welcome as well. What is the current capacity of the regions to complete site visits? And who will likely be doing these? What kind of training will be provided? Beth?
So we offered, previously we had a afternoon session for boards, no, an evening session for boards, and the following day we had a session for the regional council staff. That event was taped as well. And there has been some conversation about doing another session next year when they're actually going out and we'll probably have people identified. So I'm responsible to make sure that the regional council staffs are like the regional councils have the necessary training if they need further than what we provided with these workshops. It's up to the regions to determine who will be going on them, the actual visits, whether it will be staff people, whether it be staff and volunteers. I know in Cheryl Ann's areas, both she and Kathy have expressed interest in being involved in those. I haven't had this, and that's more because Cheryl Ann was on our committee. I haven't had the same conversations with others, so I don't really know, but it will be up to the regional council to determine who makes up their teams in the same way that they will be the ones coordinating the actual days and times of the visits.
If it is staff and volunteers doing the inspections, how will they be trained?
So as I mentioned, we did a similar workshop focused on the regional council staff training. It was similar but different in terms of some of the emphasis. And as I've indicated, we will, if the regions say we need to do it again or we need something more, then we will work with them to make sure everybody is ready to go next year before they go out.
Debbie from Rideau Hill asks a great question. Can a person on a camp's board be on a camp's board and be a site visitor for another camp?
I would say yes, but it's not my final decision. I think there's real benefit in the same way that the provincial camping associations have local camps go and visit their peers because they have the expertise of day-to-day operation of a camp. But again, it would be up to the regions to determine who is going to make up their visitation teams.
So Bev, I also wonder if that would be something that would be best done for another region. So Alberta happens to find itself in the position where it has two regions in it. It might be wise for people from the most southern region to visit the northern region camps and vice versa, because then at least you're not evaluating your friends.
Except that they've been friends for so many years, Helen, when they were all part of one conference. So again, I would have no objection to something like that. But again, it would be up to the two executive ministers from those two regions to determine if that would work. So some would say, well, it might be easier to do Living Skies and Chinook Winds than it would be to do, because you've got the northern part of Alberta and the southern part of Alberta. You know, we're open to whatever the EMs may put forward to us. But again, it comes to them as to who's going to be best qualified to do the visits and what's going to make the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
Stephen asked a question about what about a camp they're on the board of? Many camps have regional staff on the boards. I would say that's a conflict of interest. But
sorry, what's the question again, Joe?
The question is, can a regional staff person, if they're in charge of visits, visit a camp that they're on the board of directors of?
Well, given that the executive minister is on the board of every camp,
ex officio though, not like a true board member.
So I guess maybe that's the distinction is, are they there as a representative of the regional council ex officio? Because in some cases it's not the EM that attends, it's another staff person. Or are they there because they've had a long-term affiliation with that camp, but they also happen to be regional council staff? And I would say that I would not have an objection to them being part of the visitation team as long as they're not the sole visitor.
Because when you're being visited, you should also have representation from the board with your camp director from your camp to be visited.
Yeah.
So,
and that might be the more appropriate role that staff person is playing, is that they're representing the board at the visit and they don't have input into the completion of the final site visit report that comes to me.
And then can non-church people be site visitors? Once again, I don't think we know who's going to be a site visitor, and that will be up to the regions. I think that Bev and the committee might have a conversation about a guidance document for visitors might be the best way to put it out to the regions.
and I would concur with what Joe's saying. You know, we have regional council staff that are not necessarily United Church staff, of United Church people. So it is quite possible that that could happen. But it's whether or not they have the knowledge to be able to evaluate from the perspective of the United Church is what's the key feature there, not whether or not they are a member of the United Church.
Yeah, as someone who over the past 20 years has visited many accredited at least one Ontario Camping Association camp a year, been the senior visitor. I think that this is a scarier prospect for people who haven't been a visitor, because oftentimes this can be seen as a heavy hand coming in to make sure you're doing things. Really, this is just a checkup for suggestions and to see that you're following the guidelines as they're written. And if there's obviously not something you're following, then that's an issue that not only protects the United Church, but also protects you as a camp and your board members as well from any challenges in the future if something were to go wrong. Yes. Isabel is saying there is a small pool of people to draw from. Agreed. There's nothing else to say there.
Yeah, that's why I was just wondering, like, does it have to, like, would the whole team have to be from within the church, or can there be other people from the provincial camping association perhaps who might be interested in doing some site visits, who could be included in that process, who might be a little bit more arm's length than us and our sister camp, you know, the two camps in our.
And once again, I think in reality, this very conversation has brought up the idea that a one-page guidance document for regions on how to choose who those visitors will be or who to include might be worthy of you know, another meeting for us as a committee to provide that, because in Ontario you have a much greater pool of people, and in Alberta you have a large pool of people, not to say that they're always close by. So another question, will the self-assessment tool provide look-fors in the standard of what makes the UCC camp different from a provincial camp? For example, will it lay out specifics for chaplain work during camps?
So in answer to that question, the standards document identifies what the standard is and how it could be met. The self-assessment doesn't put the how it could be met part in there, so you kind of have to look at the two of them together. And it doesn't go into specifics on how to, you mentioned the chaplains. In the same way that we don't tell congregations what Christian education program they have to use, what kind of model they have to run their Sunday schools under, we don't have that authority to tell corporations, namely camps, how to do the similar things. What I would suggest, and this again, Joe, I think would be something maybe our committee puts together, is, you know, what does the region expect, or how would they evaluate things? Because not everybody has a chaplain. Not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to get chaplains to come out. They use a Christian education program person, or Joe shared at our last session that he's that person. So it's difficult to say you got to have this, this, and this, because it's not going to work for every single camp. And we want the camps to be able to demonstrate how they are doing it to meet their needs in their circumstances.
Because the chaplaincy work, what we're saying is that's related to Christian education. We're not saying it's related to pastoral care. Although I recommend people have someone that your staff can reach out to for what we would say pastoral care or mental check-ins. But when specifically in that sense, it's related to Christian education. Are there any other questions at this moment in time? Yes, Stephen.
Ask a quick question, and I had been putting questions in the chat, and I appreciate the answers, but I thought I would ask this one with the camera on, so it didn't appear as hostile as it may sound if I just wrote it out. But what I struggle to understand, and I don't mean this in a hostile way. We go through so many accreditation processes already. So we have a provincial one, we have a regional one, we have all these different things we have to do. What is the value add of this process relative to what we're already doing for the region? Because it's very time consuming, obviously for us, but it's very time consuming for the people that are going to be doing in the inspections. So I would like to understand, because I have to go back to my board and I have to explain to them why we're doing this, and I have to tell my executive director why she has to do this, and what is the value added of doing it at this level as well?
My first point before Bev speaks, Stephen, would be that I don't know what you speak of when you speak of regional visits, because I've been in this region in this conference for years, and we never have a visit from our.
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean visits necessarily. I mean, we have had visits in the past, but I know it's not a structured thing. I just mean like just the process of doing all the paperwork and gathering everything and sending everything in. Considering we do, and like Bev said at the beginning, she already gets our reports and reads our information. So I'm just trying to understand what the value add is going to be, because obviously there's got to be a value for the camps as well as the broader organization. So I'm just trying to understand that.
Okay, so maybe we go back to 20 years ago, and there's a few people on this call who have been around as long as I have. I can recall 20 years ago, camps came kicking and screaming to the table to do this. 3 years later, when everybody had reached a standard of accreditation, they acknowledged, the ones that have been doing the kicking and screaming, acknowledged that the work that they had to put in had been a lot of work, but it had forced them to put things in writing that they had always, it was in so-and-so's head, or we've always done it that way, we don't need to. So the value added is we have forced, and at that time, I will say forced, camps to start documenting things so that if anything were to happen, they had a level of defense. Yes, I'm talking the legal ass of the church, but also the legal ass of the camp. Part of my language. But that was how this got started. It grew out of the vicarious liability where volunteers could be held accountable for actions and the corporation on behalf of those volunteers. We continue to do it because what I have found is that camps, some of them are really, really good about doing their reporting. Others, they only report on the years that they're getting accredited. So it's a mechanism of ensuring, and because you're using the name of the United Church, we want to make sure, like, we're protecting the name of the church at the same time. We have 57 camps across the country. And so it's, if something happens at Camp Kidston and the gossip rumor goes out, it can affect camps elsewhere. Like, well, United Church camps don't do such and such, or United Church camps are doing this. So it's ensuring that we're portraying ourselves as what the United Church values at the same time, which is why we're now focusing on those elements and relying on, and to be honest, when that first group of camps get visited next year, we will be the test of whether or not what we've done has made it more efficient, has made it easier, because we're not asking you to pull all of this stuff together. We're just asking you to pull this portion together now. We're going to rely on your Provincial Camping Association, where it exists, for all those other pieces. We're not going to ask you to show us again that you're doing all of these other things.
Yeah, and that, to be fair, is what I'm concerned about, is just repeating the work. So if that's clear that we don't need to do that, and I think I totally understand where you're coming from. And again, in my actual job, I was responsible for quality assurance. So I totally understand why you do quality assurance. But and you're absolutely right. There's always resistance the first couple times, and then people get used to it and it's fine. So I completely agree with you there. I guess it's just, in the sense of for us, I feel particularly in the last 5-6 years, there's just been so many standards we've had to meet already, that I feel very comfortable that we're in a good spot. And I guess it seems like, and I'm just only going for efficiency here, maybe it makes, and I'm not going to ask you to change anything, but just something to maybe think about after this first round, is maybe it's the camps that get visited are the ones that, don't have those provincial associations or haven't been reporting as effectively, or there's clearly things missing in those other reports. And I don't get me wrong, again, totally understand where you're coming from about why it's important to have all these things covered. And I agree with you 100% there, being, and that's why we have our insurance and stuff. But I've also, always very cognizant of the workload that we have on, our executive director, who is our only staff member, and, a board that is entirely volunteers. So, I want to just make sure that gets kept top of mind as well.
I think the other thing that's important to understand, Stephen, is, again, with the restructuring in 2019 and the loss of presbyteries, one of the big things we heard from camps across the country is we have no connection. They felt that they were sort of lost. And we're feeling, I think that's the other main focus of these visits is and why the regions are directing them, not from the national perspective, is we're trying to maintain and improve connections between the camps and the region so that at least they have somebody that they've talked to at the regional level, that when something comes up that they need help with, whether it's being, well, where can I go to get funding for this? What can you do for us for that? They've got that connection, which had become, with the loss of the presbyteries, was a big feeling that was being seen across the country. So
right.
We're trying to maintain that connection. And I think that's maybe now at this stage, having done these for so many years, that's maybe the stronger impetus behind us doing these, is to get people out to the camps and seeing the good work that you guys are doing. I think that's a really, because I have worked with so many accreditors across over the years, and they all say, oh, it's just so great to go out and see what's going on there and hearing their stories and, seeing all the different ways that things are being done. And almost all of the accreditors we've ever had are people that worked in camps before.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Helen.
Well, Bev started answering what I was going to say, is that in this new structure, we as a whole church didn't have a chance to live into it, because as soon as we got started, then COVID came in, and so we're right very back at the beginning again, but with a gap in between. And I think that it is so important to be seen from a national and a regional level at the camps, because camps have been frustrated for years that people say that we're great for the United Church, but there's no funding available. So where are the supports? Now, the camp that I am here representing is in one region, and I live in another one. So I don't like to do things easily, people. I like to confuse things. But what's interesting is these two regions that sit next to each other, one region has been really active in connecting the camps within it, in giving them supports. They haven't given them money, but they've certainly got them together to have conversations. They've created videos, they've created resources, they've given training, like they've been really active in that. The other region has done absolutely nothing. All of the regions have different personalities. They've had different priorities. So we have one region where the camps feel, I believe, that they are thriving and that they are heard, and the other one where they have nothing. I think that if we get visitors every other year or every third year from either provincial camping or the United Church, especially the United Church, at least we will know that people know that we're there. And I think that is huge.
Thank you, Helen. Isabel.
Yeah, thanks for that, Helen. I think that's an important thing. I was kind of thinking a little bit along the same lines, and hearing what Bev was saying about the accreditation process. And it feels like when I hear you say that, Bev, the desire is that this be part of an increased support for camps. And again, as Helen was saying, we have to kind of live into it and see what it turns into being. I would say sort of systemically, it's a bit challenging to see that at this moment, because it's a very hierarchical process. Like an accreditation process is not it's not typically seen as a process of support. It's a process of evaluation and correction, right? Typically. And I think it will probably be experienced very differently in different regions, as Helen's pointing out, because I think there may be some regions where there is an existing relationship and the accreditation piece will kind of be experienced within that context of an existing and hopefully positive kind of relationship. I'm a little concerned for those regions where this may be the only connection, because it really is, and I think that's where a lot of my questions come about. Well, who's making the decision about what counts as meeting the standard and that kind of thing? Because it really is it's not a mutually supportive relationship in an accreditation process, right? There's the person who's being evaluated, and there's the person who's evaluating, and that can feel either wonderful and supportive and formative, like that it's formative assessment, which is lovely. Like we're growing, you're helping me grow, but it can also feel very intimidating and threatening as well. If it's being done by somebody that you've never met before, you don't know what their standards are, you don't know what their pet peeves are. It's a bit like the health inspector showing up, and it's like, I don't know what they're going to pick on us for this year. It could be a completely different person from the one I saw last time, and they may give me very different stories. So again, it's just, I think I'm reassured, I guess, if the intent is for it to be part of building connection and relationship. And I hope that is part of, I hope that happens. I don't know that this is a great place to start with that process in those regions where that's where we're at.
Thank you for that, Isabel. And again, I can't speak for the regions, but I will say that it's not like this is a brand new process like it was 20 years ago. We've been doing this, mind you, the last few years we haven't, as Helen pointed out, things happened and then COVID hit us. And it was really encouraging to see how many of the camps were up and running again last year where they were able to. But it's some of these comments that you shared with us, I will share with the executive ministers as well, to say, this is some of the fears that people are having, here's some of the concerns they've got, and here's what we really want to be seeing happening, so that we do pass on the and we won't name any names. We'll just say this is, in the course of the conversations, this is what we were hearing. And I think that's important information to share with them as they, in the next year, decide how they're going to do the visits in terms of who's going to participate, how many people, all those things.
Kathy from Canyon Church had her hand up. Her physical hand up. I thought waving.
Yeah. Hi. So I've been with Canyon Church Camp for, how old is my daughter? 37 years. And we've been through the process with Bev from the beginning with accreditations, and been the camp representative for both Alberta Camping Association accreditation visits and United Church camping accreditation visits. So various times. We learn something valuable from everybody. And almost to a person, the accreditors are very supportive. They look at this as a growing process, as should we. We should welcome it. It will help us keep our campers safer and provide we'll be will be better documented so we can save ourselves if we have to at the end. I just think it's important for us to put our energy into and be sincere in our efforts. That's all I wanted to say, Bev. We did have one accreditor one year who just freaked out on us. And he came running into Lethbridge from the camp because we didn't have any records out at camp, because it's only a summer camp. So our registration records and everything were kept at people's places in Lethbridge. So he came and visited me at my clinic and gave me the 3rd degree, and he seemed pretty suspicious and nervous about us, but I think we passed that year.
And I think that was maybe your very first year, Kathy.
Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. Oh, and he quite upset about the way our kids swim, is that they don't just swim as they jump into a big, deep pool in a river. He thought that might be a little scary.
I think the reality is that we will also, I've written down to put in like a visitor feedback form and a camp feedback form on the visitor and the team, because we've been using that in the Ontario Camps Association for years. So if you have a challenge with a personality challenge with someone that you're visiting, that's a different thing. And also this idea of, I think that this is set up so that the power trip shouldn't happen. And in all reality, and Bev has not approved me to say this, in all reality, this is similar to, this is the national church delegating their responsibility to the region. And if there's a challenge that the region, someone in that visiting team has misinterpreted the good nature of the standards, then really a conversation between Bev and the camp can happen that can override anything the region has, those regional visitors have said, if that's to the benefit, right? If that's the way it goes. Not that that is going to happen. Many of our visits are very congenial and very much helpful. And as Stephen said, there is a ton of, I don't know about your provinces, but like the health associate, the health, the things that we have in Ontario, the boards of health, have us doing a camp safety plan every year now too. That doesn't have to be new, but it just has to be handed in. So I just keep repeating it. But all of it is to ensure that you as a camp staff and many of you as camp board members are clearly covered off, that you've done your due diligence, that camp is going to be successful, and we have everything in place to make it amazing for the campers that we serve.
I noticed, I think it was Debbie had made the comment about it's a time for celebration. And that's exactly what we want as part of the site visit, is that you can show off your camp. Every camp has the things that they're so proud of, that it's something that they've done or that they've been able to achieve. So yes, it should be a time of celebration. And as part of the celebration, we're looking at the other pieces as well. But it's so difficult for the stories to get out about all of our ministries. I was in a meeting this past week, and there was a couple of stories shared. It was a very small meeting, but it was like, how do we get these stories out there? And that's a challenge over and above. But the more people that go out and see, actually hands-on and see the ministries, the more that, we can get the stories out further from whatever mechanism. So yes, Debbie, it very much should be a celebration, and you should be, but it's also time for you to raise those challenges that you're facing, that, that dining hall is 50 years old and we need to do something about it. We need help to do that. How do we get the word out that we need that help? So, I think there's the opportunities for, saying this is what we need. We need this. See, you got to see it. Because seeing it in person is different than hearing it on a piece of paper.
That's great. Is there any final questions before we break? By break, I mean you don't need to come back. Sorry, before we end. I'm not going to make you come back. I do want to recognize that, like, we have West Haven camp on the call from Newfoundland, and we have camps from almost every province. The only, I don't see New Brunswick camps here. Quebec isn't here, and I don't see one of our Saskatchewan camps, but I could be mistaken. So that is great. Debbie put in the comments about learning from each other to make successful summers. I want to reiterate, this call is brought to you with the help of the Outdoor Ministries Institute, which was funded by a new ministry fund. 3 years ago, that fund started. We're in our final year of that. You can join the Outdoor Ministries Institute calls by going to wearecamp.ca and registering. When you register, you'll have to choose a state. I'm not correcting it until I get next year's in. But you can also sign up for our newsletter there as well, which is through MailChimp, and that's where information comes out. The Outdoor Ministries Institute coordinators, myself and Janice Noble from Camp Kidston, were in Pennsylvania this week attending an ecumenical event with 5 other mainline denominations, and have some exciting news coming up that we will release going forward over the next 6 months to let everyone know what's going on as we work more ecumenically with our other outdoor ministries groups, because we all have things to offer and things to go. Oh, and we do have a Saskatchewan camp, so really we're just missing New Brunswick and Quebec, but I didn't expect Quebec to be on the call.
I think Quebec was on the first call.
Yeah. Awesome.